I'm starting us off. I want to say thank you so much for taking some time on a Sunday to learn with me, and I'm going to be sharing an updated version of a presentation called Roles and Lanes, and I'm not going to waste time. I'm going to jump right in and share my screen. And I've built in breaks for questions at different times. So just know that. And I'm happy to jump into this with this crew. So I'm going to take us through some slides for this presentation, Roles and Lanes, the Joys of Governance on a Synagogue Board or Committee. And I'll be focusing on what I call the flow of the work of governance as it involves a congregation's board and its committees. I'll also talk a lot about the roles that are specific to the board president, the board itself, the board's executive committee, and the various committees of the board. And I'm using that terminology deliberately. Committees are not part of the board, but they are of the board, meaning that they report to the board and they have a set of vital roles to play in governance that we'll unpack. We'll be looking at how these four parts of the governance system, the president, exec, board, and committee, interact when decisions need to be made. What does it look like when things are working in a healthy way? So let me acknowledge that the system of synagogue governance very much includes clergy and key staff. My presentation today is not focusing on those parts of the system, though it will address them from time to time. I'm happy to come back and do another presentation and discussion, if you want, on the dynamic between board and clergy, board and key staff, like executive director or religious school director, education director. Um, Also, I want to say that I think what we'll cover today will be helpful in getting our minds oriented to the idea of really well-defined roles and specific lanes in which different kinds of work get done. Those are the hallmarks of a healthy congregational system, and they also apply in their own ways to the unique relationship between clergy or between key staff. So let me just pause and ask if there are questions so far before I jump into the next chunk. Too soon for questions. Okay, that's okay. All right, so let's start with the president's role. And Reza, I'm not trying to freak you out here, but presidents do a lot. Um, they set priorities, they assign tasks, they intentionally amplify important messages through multiple communications channels. They attend to morale. They have to listen a lot and absorb a lot from all corners. They explain the board's work to the congregation sometimes. They're responsible for considering and trying to manage the board's bandwidth and energy. They collaborate closely with clergy and key staff, and they work to uphold these different roles within a system that's made up of people who sometimes aren't entirely aware of what those respective roles are or how things get done. Um, and if that wasn't already more than enough, presidents also prepare for leadership transition. They try to help another person get ready to be president. And hopefully there is such a person, who is in line or who has been recruited, not at the last minute. And so they also have that as part of their very big set of responsibilities. And that is why they earn themselves or should be gifted with uh, gift certificates for massages, spa breaks, and other wonderful things. You don't need to memorize this list, but it gives us a picture of just how many hats presidents wear. So if you are a president or might someday be one, it's helpful to have this list repeated now and then because the more you remember that it really is a big job, the more you're likely to remember that one of the best skills you can possibly bring to it is delegating. And one of the roles that board members can play that's really important is to repeatedly ask your president, is there something I can take off your plate? Um, are there some smaller steps that are things that just need to get done with this task that I know you need to spend a lot of time talking to different people about so that there can be less discord around it. If there are ways that you can extend yourself to help in that way, you're going to be making your president more viable and sustainable. So, okay, having said that, I want to take an oversimplified look with you at one of the most important flows of work and decision making in the governance system. And this is oversimplified and it's super basic, but it really is perhaps the most crucial function that goes on between a board and a committee. And it's basically this. The board wants a committee to create a proposal for something that will ultimately need board approval. It's that simple. Maybe this is an issue involving ritual life or the religious school or access for outside groups to the building. Whatever it is, the ideal is that the board tasks an appropriate committee with doing some detailed and focused work that results in creating a proposal for the board to consider. So if there's an agenda item at a board meeting that involves a new possible decision, it's perfectly fine for the president to allot a chunk of time for the board to discuss it. But the board's discussion should be aimed at determining whether it's going to assign the appropriate committee to do the work of developing probably one of two things, either a report or a proposal. What you don't want is when that new item for a possible decision appears for the first time on a board agenda, what you don't want is then the board spending the next hour trying to hash out the details of the decision to be made themselves. That's an example of the board doing a committee's work, which is not the best lane for that work. So let's think about that for a moment. If the board does the work of the committee for it, why have the committee? And also, how long do you want your board meetings to last? Because if there are other important agenda items and you engage in the board doing the committee's work and spend an hour, then those other items are one of two things is going to happen with the other items on the agenda. One is that they'll get treated similarly. That's what boards that don't end their meetings on time do. So then you end up with these marathon board meetings. The other, for boards that do end their meetings on time, is that the other agenda items get tabled or they get insufficient hurried decisions made because there's a lack of time. I'll add another reason not to govern this way. If your board happens to, let's say, be good at hashing through this particular issue and does spend that hour and comes up with a detailed policy proposal itself, but this committee exists that's supposed to be kind of the locus of deeper thought, research, discussion, and proposals on this, then what does your board do next? You can hand the committee something for them to just kind of rubber stamp, but that isn't good for the committee's morale. Or you may put the committee in a very uncomfortable position. They may feel like there's some important things you didn't give consideration to, or that they see very differently from their perspective. But now, instead of having the opportunity to have been sort of given uh, a mandate to come up with a proposal with some broad goals, where they can share their independent thinking and perspectives with you in shaping a proposal. Instead, now if they're going to differ with the board, now they have to have a conflict. And that's not the right lane for conflicts to happen in. It's not a constructive or productive arena. There are lanes for discussion and debate and conflict that are appropriate and healthy, but you don't want to set your committee up, by handing them something that's 95% done, but procedurally you want them to kind of okay it and hand it back to you. So those are all the reasons why it's way better if you stick with the preferred process, right? Which is, as a gross oversimplification, what I described in the previous slide. So there are three goals of this preferred process, right? So the board talks about the issue and defines really broad goals and then assigns the committee to bring back a detailed proposal. When the committee brings back a detailed proposal, the hope is that ultimately it's going to be something that the board will vote overwhelmingly in favor of. Unanimous is fine, but a lopsided vote is also okay. What you don't want are votes that squeak by. You don't want 8-7 or 6-5. Remember, a close board vote on a policy decision, um, it's it's not an election where, when it's over, um, basically winner takes all, and then we all figure out what happens next. It's a community. It's a religious community, and close votes on important board items are likely to exacerbate divisions within that community and make the community less coherent. Um, so there are other options, and we'll talk about those in a moment. But this brings us to a second goal, which is kind of attached to the first one, which is that there really should be no surprises at board votes, during board votes. If something is on the agenda for a vote at a board meeting, the president and the board members should already know how that vote is going to go, where everybody stands. Surprise is not your friend, and there shouldn't be sudden decisions to vote now on important matters happening during a board meeting. So as I'm continuing to describe this process, there's a third goal, which is that the real hard work, the blood, sweat, and tears, this is my attempt to create like a new acronym. I don't know if it's going to stick. That should happen in what I call the in-betweens. Um, what does that mean? It means in between board meetings. It should not happen. The real conversations that involve disagreement, that involve um, different people sharing different perspectives and trying to hash through um, how they feel about a decision to be made, and all of that. That's work that should be happening in between board meetings. Board meetings should not be places of high drama. Um, where is this blood, sweat, and tears, these debates or discussions happening? It's happening within the committee. That's a good place for it before the committee is able to come together around a proposal. It's happening in informal conversations, potentially involving members of the board and different congregants who may have a lot of influence or who may have um, just important perspectives to share that board members want to know or that committee members want to know. It's happening in back and forth conversations between committee members and congregants as the committee tries to feel out the congregation in its internal diversity on whatever the issue is. Um, that's where all of that messier and important stuff is happening. Board meetings themselves aren't the place really for that. Board meetings are places for the board to assign tasks, hear reports from committees or individuals, and vote on well-prepared proposals. And here's something I want to add to all of this. If a proposal isn't ready for an overwhelming yes by the board, then the board can do two things that are perfectly healthy and that committees should understand are part of healthy governance and are not an insult. The board can send it back to the committee and ask for the gaps to be filled. The gaps between what the committee has proposed and what the board needs to vote yes by a lopsided margin. Okay, so the board can send it back to committee and identify those areas that are the gaps, or the board can table it. What you want to really avoid is the board voting down a proposal that came to it from a committee. Okay, you're in it once in a great while, that could happen. But if the system is healthy, it's only going to happen rarely. It's only going to come to that rarely, and because of a quirky series of events. Because this system, as you're probably starting to gather, is partly designed to avoid those kinds of divisive showdowns, right? The board voting down a committee's proposal really demoralizes members of the committee and creates some damage that might be hard to repair. So far better that something gets tabled, maybe tabled for a long time, or because that's more of a draw, right? Like that's more of the board and the committee maybe acknowledging that they're far apart on a particular matter, and it's not ripe, it's not ready for some kind of vote, um, right? Or sending it back to committee and asking them to continue working on it. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to apply all of what I've just talked about with you to a more detailed scenario. But I want to pause and ask if folks have questions at this point. Okay. Hoping that things are clear and make sense.
I'm sorry.
Um,
Actually, I do have a little bit of a question.
Hello, Caitlin.
And maybe it's for the end, but if we haven't been um, kind of in practice of assigning out tasks to committees, maybe I don't know when it would be appropriate, but is there a way to maybe talk through what that would look like as we start to develop that kind of relationship?
Yes, for sure. I mean, what I'm describing is this idealized model.
Totally, and I want to get to ideal. I love that.
And it, if there's a big gap between how things are done in reality and some version of this model, some approximate, workable, realistic version of this model, then the path is to get there in small steps, and not to try to get there in a rush because it won't work.
Totally.
Right? So but this is like architecture that it's a good idea to try to build. And it may be that it is easily built vis-a-vis one committee. Um, but it's not going to be with these two other committees because one of them's dormant, and because the other one just meets infrequently, and the chair is great at a bunch of things, but responding to emails isn't one of them. And so, like, like in the real world, um, usually good advice for boards in congregations is to start where things can work really well, the easiest or the fastest, and then grow and build from there.
Awesome.
Um, and if not every topic obviously lends itself to a committee to decide, and or if there is a committee, maybe it's not functioning great. So I'm not saying that there's never a role for the board to kind of do the work themselves. Um, what I am saying is if it, as you adapt a model like this, the board can self-consciously decide, we're doing the grunt work on this. We're giving ourselves 3 months to do it. It needs to include some of us taking on the task of informally sounding out people from many different um, subgroups within the congregation. We'll take two board meetings to have people report back. We'll assign a couple people from the board to draw up a proposal. And then we'll sort of proceed as if that proposal had come to us from a committee. I mean, you can find a way to, to keep
Totally. No, I
going.
so appreciate it. I'm just trying to
Uh,
put some framing in my brain. Thank you.
No, it was a great question. It was a great question. I also want to say, with the example that I just described, it's so oversimplified, right? Like it imagines the board dreams up the decisions to then delegate to committees. That's half the time or more not going to be where the conversation gets started. It may be the committee comes to the board, right? But even if the committee comes to the board and says, we really think there's some policy changes that need to get made about such and such, and we already have, a brief document we can share with you that outlines what we think those policy changes probably are going to need to be. It's still important for the board to then put that on its agenda, have some time for the board to discuss it together in meeting, just not an hour, right? Like 15 minutes. And then even if what they do is delegate it back to that committee, that's healthy. And it's healthy. It's best if the committee knows that's how things work and that's kind of what they're expecting. Um, and if the board also knows that that's how things work and everybody's expecting the same things to happen. Okay, actually, can I prevail upon you, Caitlin, to be a reader because this now I'm throwing this scenario up onto our screen, and would you just do the
Absolutely.
first paragraph and then hand tap someone else to pick it up after that?
Oh, sure. Scenario one. You're a board member who has kids that attend your Shalom Smile religious school. A fellow parent with a child in sixth grade tells you that her husband is a person with severe social anxiety, often triggered by feeling sensory overwhelm. He wanted to honor the B'nai Mitzvah program's requirement that parents attend multiple Shabbat services with their kids, so he attended once and the environment was overwhelming for him. The singing and use of instruments flooded his capacities, and after services, well meaning people kept coming up to him and introducing themselves, spiking his social anxiety so severely that he has not attended any more services despite the requirement. She and he go to a support group that is trying to educate the public about creating accommodations for people with sensory sensitivity challenges, such as including regular announcements, letting people know that it is socially acceptable to wear earplugs, and identifying a quiet space to take breaks in during events. She believes that they'll be able to work out a one-time plan with the rabbi and ed director to get their family through their son's bar mitzvah, but she feels strongly that there's a need for more substantive accommodation policy. She isn't sure who the best person is to talk to, but she plans to email everyone she can think of, the ed director, the rabbi, and the religious school committee chair, the accessibility committee chair, to start the conversation. Diane, you're the first box. Will you read the next paragraph, please? Thank you.
You could even do the next two.
Except that I can't see the bottom one. Uh, so I can do the meanwhile. Meanwhile, another board member recently told you that a different Shalom Smile parent has been complaining about the lack of a scent-free policy at services and has already spoken to the rabbi about taking steps to ensure a scent-free space during their child's bat mitzvah in a few years. But that parent also expressed interest in reaching out to other congregants with similar sensitivities and advocating for a scent-free policy at all events. And for some reason, your photos are covering up the next paragraph. So I'm going to turn to Judy to read that last one.
Okay, and so when you received an email from the board president today asking if anyone has additional agenda items they would like to include in next month's board meeting, you reply yes. New possible accessibility/inclusivity concerns.
There we go. Okay, so thank you. So um, I want to bring up a couple of discussion questions. And the first one, and this is assuming that, everything went fine. The president added this to the board agenda, got a chance to chat a little bit um, with you. You're the hypothetical board member, right? Collectively you. And and so has been able to also let the others on the board know via email the gist of what this topic is going to be about at the meeting. And so when the board discusses this, there are three different committees that could be assigned the task to work on this. There's the religious school committee, there's the ritual practice committee, and there's an accessibility committee. So it's, first of all, in this scenario, these are all functional committees. So this is a blessing that all three of these committees are decently functioning. They may have their issues, but they're functioning. The board could decide to assign this to one of those committees. It could also create an ad hoc committee. So I want to just throw it open to a couple, maybe a few folks to respond with your thought. What do you think might make the most sense? Anyone? Anyone?
Well, I could say, I mean, it seems like it's, you know, the, I don't know about the religious school committee because, that seems to be a different committee, but, I mean, I think the accessibility committee has those are issues that pertain to that committee, but I think that they would work in conjunction. There are, they need to discuss whatever it is that they come up with the ritual practices committee and the other committees involved. So it's really not an isolate. And then I would guess that once they develop some sort of a decision around that, they would come to the board and ask for feedback or approval or whatever.
Thanks, Amy. I'm really glad that you jumped in because this is the kind of discussion and debate that totally is in the lane of what is a healthy discussion for the board to be having during this time that the issue was first raised, right? And you'll notice this is a discussion and a debate about who should do the more granular, detailed, knowledgeable, informed work on this. The board has not jumped into using this 15 minutes or 20 minutes, whatever it was that was allotted for this. They have not jumped into all sounding off with their own personal view on what's the best policy to weave together to address both of these concerns. Um, Instead, they're focusing on this important question, which is this is a little fuzzy. Like there's a piece of this that sort of sits within the circle of at least these three committees. So what do we want to do? And it's also really good for the board to, think creatively. So Amy, when you mentioned the accessibility committee, maybe, but the board should tell them they really want them to consult with the other two committees. That's the kind of direction the board can give, right? So if the board approaches the accessibility committee, what they need to give them in order to be fair and give them doable work is they need to give them, um, you know, the first thing they're going to do is they may want to hear the accessibility committee's reactions to the very idea of coming up with some new policy. But the board can still decide during this first serious conversation about this that they're ready to give the accessibility committee an assignment unless the committee tells them that they think that this is like a big mistake. But the assignment is going to be in broad strokes. Broadly develop, broadly feel out how different members of the community with a stake in these issues feel about it. Find out some ideas that could be good ideas for these matters, and come back at us with a proposal within X amount of time, or tell us if you feel that there's a need for there to be a different time frame. Those are the kinds of instructions that boards can give. Rabbi Ruchi.
And I hope this is an appropriate case for the rabbi to weigh in the board discussion and say, as the person who staffs the Ritual Practices Committee, I can say with confidence that that it could cause some problems if such a policy is handed to and is decided on and handed to the Ritual Practices Committee without anybody from the Ritual Practices Committee being invited to weigh in on it. So I would love for the board to think about how we make sure that stakeholders, like the people who are holding and shaping the Shabbat space, get to feel some ownership about the creation of this policy.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you jumped in, because this is an example, right, where this is going to have, there's at least two key staff people. There's the rabbi and there's also an ed director who need to weigh in and be closely connected to the decision-making discussions and process itself. And this is also one of the reasons why it's important for for the rabbi and those key staff people to be ex officio members of the board, right? To be at this meeting and be in this discussion, so that these things are being thought about and anticipated, right? So this could also be a thing where the board says, we're going to start by asking the accessibility committee for something, but we're going to tell them that we're also going to be bringing their suggestions to the ritual practice committee. So if all of this sounds like a recipe for this taking months, it is, Like this is not something a board can sort of turn on a dime on and do quickly. And that's not great for the people who had maybe a more pressing need, um, and who would like to see something more than one-off accommodations. But it's the reality of how these things process through. Um, okay. Um, there's not just input from um, the rabbi, which is absolutely essential, and the ed director, I would argue, also essential. But these items, because they're going to affect what services are like, this is an item. If I were on the board on a board, I would say this needs some community feedback. Um, so I'm adding to this scenario that during this initial conversation, one board member feels very strongly that before it even gets assigned to a committee, it would be really good to communicate to the general membership that the board is now taking up these issues and to set up a month or so in which members are invited to contact a designated board member to share their first thoughts. Okay, so that is one option. Right, one of the things the board needs to decide is not just who is going to do the work, most of the work on this, but if it is an issue that warrants community input, member input, when and how. So one option, and there's a member of the board in this scenario who's pushing for it, is let's get their input now on the very front end, right? And in this particular scenario, the president likes this idea, but kind of runs it by the rest of the board, and the rest of the board is kind of lands on um, you'll see in this scenario, the rest of the board is kind of wants to go ahead and let a committee get started on this and then create a space for input for membership. And I'm just inviting you to think about what might the pros and cons of either choice be. These are very specific judgment call kinds of decisions, but they're board decisions. Okay, so I just want to emphasize again, um, because a lot of times when I'm doing a presentation about this, sometimes folks will say, but what about like the democracy aspects of this? Where's the discussion and debate and room for different points of view? And or the study of Jewish practice and tradition and its evolution, right? Where do those things fit in? And I'm identifying three different places in pink, and then one in black that isn't really a specific place. And I'll actually start with number 4 first. The thing you can be surest about is the place for the real freewheeling debate and negotiation of differences really is any time other than when a final board vote is happening. That should not be happening during the same board meeting that this is going to get voted on. By the time it's by that board meeting is a vote where it's totally there's no suspense. Everybody already knows it's going to be 8-1, right? Otherwise, if it's not, the board sent it back or the board tabled it. Tabling doesn't mean ignoring. There can be a lot of activity going on informally and a lot of work being done while something's tabled. Tabled just means now's not the time to vote, right? But if you happen to multitask and read the pink stuff, you can see that I identified when are times for good freewheeling debate and negotiating of difference. It can happen during the board meeting before it assigns a committee to work on something. And apropos of Rabbi Ruchi's question, this is also a time when key staff or clergy may be needed to share their concerns and opinions. And again, I want to say, but the freewheeling debate that's happening on the board is about things like who should do the work on this, what time frame, how should we invite community input. It's not the actual details of the content itself. Right? So another place for freewheeling debate, for Jewish study, for having rabbi or other key staff present during a couple of committee meetings and doing some of the teaching or studying or discussing with the committee within that work of the committee over a couple meetings, perhaps, maybe more than a couple meetings, is a great place for those discussions and that messier problem-solving work. And also in and some in-between spaces. Okay, and this allows me to come back to an important component of this process, which is say your committee's done a bunch of work on this, and they've kind of come together around the rough contours of a proposal. And it's a good idea. This is a place where the executive committee can play a really awesome role, and that is that you can choose for your executive committee or one member of it even to liaise with that committee and hear them out about what they'd like to propose and give feedback to the committee about how that exec member thinks the board is likely to take and respond to those proposals to help identify where the gaps might be. And this is all in service of trying to get to a yes that works for the community. So I want to say a little bit more about that. You can use members of your executive committee in this role, or if that's not how you want the exec to function, you can assign this responsibility to a designated board member or two, but it's important that there be one or two people from the board who are kind of liaising with the committee that's doing the work. And they're going to be able to allow disagreements to get worked on and hopefully whittled down, right? And so I'm just hoping that you're able to sort of look at these bullet points here to see what it is that those people representing the board informally in conversation with the committee are doing. And by doing all of this, you've got everybody, as I said, kind of moving towards what'll hopefully be a yes. Okay, so now I'm going to step back a moment from this scenario, and I want to describe 5 things that we're trying to do in governance. So one of them is we want to include members of the congregation to a degree warranted by the importance of the issue, right? You don't want to ask for the members to all chime in on something that is really small potatoes. That's precious bandwidth from your members that you're asking for. So, ask them for things that they would consider important. Ask them if you have a feeling that there's going to be a bunch of people upset that they weren't asked. And collecting input, it's okay to assign and announce and publicize a limited amount of time and a limited pathway for that input. Folks have 2 months to share their thoughts via email or phone call with these 2 people, right? That's fine. And if some folks were checked out and you shared that message, through multiple means of your communications channels and they didn't get it, that's okay. That happens sometimes. People's lives get busy with other things, but they haven't been mistreated by the process. All you're required to do, and the most you should be demanding of yourselves to do, is create a reasonable space and defined channels for member input when you feel that the issue at hand needs to have member input. Okay. As I've already said, communicate, discuss, disagree, and wrestle in between board meetings. Right? Part of what this system is trying to also do is conserve people's precious time and energy by wisely locating work-specific lanes. you're avoiding surprising people. And I've said that about board meetings, no surprises, please. But it's also good to not surprise people on the committees. Um, and the last thing I'm going to say is a counterpoint to what I've been talking about, which is um, you have to accept in advance that there's no way to do this perfectly. And you have to give people the benefit of the doubt. Right? People are going to fall short sometimes. Somebody was assigned on the board to go liaise with that committee, and they didn't get to it. And now the committee's ready, and they've got this thing, and this is kind of a president's judgment call. Committee's ready. The president's looking at the thing they've got written up. The president anticipates that there may only be some issues with a couple of small parts of it. So in the president's judgment, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and have the committee come to the next meeting, present this. Better to not vote on it in the same meeting. So there's a little space to avoid surprises. But, again, whereas, right, the other scenario is the president looks at this and goes, oh boy, this is going to set some people's hair on fire. We're not having the committee come present this at this meeting. There's some discussion that needs to happen. There needs to be either myself or preferably someone from the exec or someone who was assigned to liaise needs to sort of confer with the committee members and help address some of the gaps and differences and do that work before we think about if they're going to have a chance to reshape their proposal. So I'm going to now fast forward 4 months, and I'm going to read this aloud because I'm coming to the end of the time I wanted to use to present frontally. Normally, I'd have one of you read this, but bear with me breaking the rules of good presentations and reading off a slide that's dense with text to you. I'll only do it for this one slide. So imagine the scenario we were talking about and fast forward 4 months. Here's what happened. The board ended up assigning this task to the accessibility committee with a directive that they keep the religious school and ritual committees in the loop as they did some research and work on a possible proposal. One member from both of these other committees ended up working on this task with the accessibility committee. The members of the 3 committees kind of came up with this idea themselves. And so for this issue, they all just came into the habit of calling themselves the Accessibility Committee Plus 2. And so the Accessibility Committee Plus 2 informed the board that the first thing they want to do is do a newsletter article that reports on what they've learned querying congregants. They've also asked a couple of neighboring friendly churches. And remember that support group that the Shalom Smile parent and her husband go to? They were able to, they asked and were given contact info for someone connected to that support group who was also able to provide them with some good info they hadn't learned before. The newsletter article doesn't make any policy recommendations, but it does report on their work. It reissues the invitation for members to be in touch and says how long they have to do it. It's looking like there are some potential policy recommendations on the horizon of the committee's work, and that none of them require any major new budgetary expenses. That's an important thing for boards to always ask committees to account for when they make a proposal. They don't have to know exactly what the dollar amounts would be. They just have to make their best guess. I'm guessing if we do this, it will cost us more than $1,500 and less than $10,000. That's fine if that's as good as it can be. But do ask committees, if they're going to put a proposal forward, to address, does this require any new budgetary expenses? But there is a curveball. The Accessibility Committee chair has emailed the president saying that she feels that the board has not come through on a priority that her committee has been raising for the last 2 previous presidencies, and that is finding a way to increase the annual line item budget for ASL interpreters. She has asked the board to treat this funding item as its top accessibility priority, or else explain to the congregation through public communication why it has chosen to move these other issues forward ahead of the sign language interpretation budget issue. So what I leave you with the question, what options do the president and the board have at this juncture? And I threw this monkey wrench in on purpose because this is exactly the kind of thing that is likely to come up, um, and may come up because you're getting close to the finish line or thought you were, right? And that's okay. That's okay. And it may mean that this is all going to take even a bit longer, but this is how committees do important work, um, and how boards also then stay in their lane of being reminded of the kinds of um, like top level decision making that they are responsible for doing. Okay. Um, I'm going to leave these up as things for you to just let marinate, maybe even after our session's over. But the system that I've described for you, it really does include lanes for um, democracy, the various components of what we think of as democratic processing. It's not a pure democracy. This is definitely a representative form of democracy, um, but it's got democratic elements within it, right? And the congregation's ultimate check and balance on the board is whether or not they vote the same board members back into the board. How trust works in this system has a lot, depends a lot on different kinds of trust. And creating that trust requires a certain amount of training and education, not a ton, but enough so that committees understand how they fit in this system, right? And committees have a lot of power in this system. They don't have the power to decide things that are the board's domain to decide. But they do have an awful lot of power, and the board is depending on them, right? The board is depending on them to do the deeper work on specific issues. And accountability, as I talked about, plays out in ways that are both formal and informal in this system. But ultimately, the congregation has accountability, and the board has accountability, and so do the committees. So I think I'm going to stop there because that's me yakking at you for an hour, and I don't want to do that any longer. There's some other slides that I have that have to do with how committees work and how to help them work better. Um, let's we have a little time for discussion. Let's start that if that's okay. And then I may show you one slide that I think could be really helpful from the committee stuff. But I guess my big question to you is there anything that I talked about that didn't feel clear, or that you'd like me to say more about? I'll start there.
Um, I guess I would like to throw an observation out to this group, which is such a great group because so many of you have been engaged in committee work deeply for so long at TBI. And I guess what I would say is this scenario that you've presented, Rabbi Maurice, makes perfect sense to me, but it doesn't reflect the relationship that I have experienced between our board and our committees. And so, and it could be that this is my perception right now, but I don't feel like our board has communicated much in the time that I've been on it with committees to ask them for these things. I would say the finance committee has been the exception. I don't think that the board has enough of a relationship with a lot of these committees to ask them for these things. And I don't think that these committees are accustomed, because of that, I don't think the committees are accustomed to the board asking for things. And I don't think that the board has done their part to recognize the value that committees have to the congregation. So I guess I just want to throw that out there for people to give their own reflections, and I encourage anybody to push back on that perception if they would like to, or feel moved to.
I saw Phyllis signaling.
Yeah, I think there's a distinction between the good works committees and the ad hoc. For example, a nominating committee has a specific job and reports back and kind of fits better in the discussion we've just been having than the various good works committees.
I think I'll just echo Phyllis's observation in terms of policy advisory committees seem like they have a very bound task. And as I was listening, and so things come back around, like things are, I can't think of a better word than like farmed out and come back, like the finance committee, the Tomatora advisory committee, the nominating committee, the 5-year plan committee, when there's like specific, the finance committee, safety committee, like when there's specific tasks that we think of as tasks rather than the idea of programming as a task. But when I was listening to Rabbi Maurice kind of go through this, I think that's shifting my thinking a little bit, and I'll want to sit and kind of percolate on that. Like, what does it look like to go to a good works committee, sisterhood or queer chavurah or racial justice or whomever, and be like, hey, we'd love to see this kind of programming. Is that what I'm hearing from this presentation? And correct me if I'm wrong, is it would be appropriate for the board to say like, hey, we'd love to see 5 programs about, I don't know, racial justice in the next year. Can you come up with a proposal to make that happen? Or what do you need from us to help make that happen? But I think I haven't thought of it with that framing before in the same way. So anyway, that's my reflection in terms of echoing Phyllis and Race's um, kind of perspectives, I think.
If I could respond, I think this is a really good topic, and um, this might be helpful. So you can kind of think of the work that most committees do as falling into one of 3 categories of work. Um, the categories are advisory, decision-making, and operational. And let me explain what I mean by each one of those. So if a committee, explicitly has an advisory role, like for example, a common configuration in a lot of congregations in our movement would be that like the ritual committee really functions in an advisory role vis-a-vis its relationship with the rabbi, by which I mean the rabbi has veto power if the ritual committee wants to make
Exactly
a
how our ritual
change.
committee functions.
Okay. And but uh, and then apart from that veto
The
power,
committee also has veto power. If I want to go off and try something that is, I
okay,
consult with the committee, and if they all hate it, then I'm not going to do it.
okay, that's interesting. So I think that's less common. Um, that sounds like Reconstructionism leveling things as it tends to do. But in any case, uh, but so let's just go with I want to make the point I was trying to make. So the ritual committee may have some decision-making power, especially when the rabbi is not vetoing, um, right? And hopefully that's been defined um, well enough so that folks on the committee know what's considered a legitimate way for them to experiment or implement some changes and what things require um, board approval, right? Or who to ask or when to ask the board if no one's really sure. But if for the most part, the role is advisory, then that's really clear, and they're going to have expectations that even if they are a united front of committee members about adopting something different, that they can't just make that decision on their own. Um, so that would be an example of advisory. So decision making, it's a little easier for me to do an example with a religious school committee for decision making. So decision making is this is not an issue that requires the board to create a new policy. We have our policies. We're implementing our policies as faithfully as best we can. And it within our structure and policies, there are some decisions. A parent wants their student to be able to do X. There are some decisions that the religious school director feels that they need the backing of the committee. And the committee also would feel that the committee should make the judgment call about how to correctly apply the policies and goals that are written down for the school. So that would be decision making. Operational is when the people on the ritual committee themselves or ask other people to go change the Aron HaKodesh for the High Holidays so that it's got its beautiful High Holy Days special curtain, and so that the Sifrei Torah have got their special accoutrements, right? It's when the religious school committee goes ahead and does the bake sale, or has members of the committee playing a role with the safety committee regarding how you're safeguarding kiddos during religious school. Like that's so advisory, decision making, operational. It sounds like it would be a good idea if you asked your committees to kind of self-analyze and report to you how much of their time and energy are they spending in those different capacities? And does it seem like it's working well to them? And this will be, I think most committees would be actually very interested in kind of taking a moment to step back and consider this, to create the kind of relationship between the committees and the board that I was describing. That would be something that would involve, the chairs of committees coming to understand this system, and then the board and the committees together deciding on a way to incrementally implement aspects of it. And I think it would be important to do that with care. So Caitlin's example, if I can use that example for a moment, if the board was discussing wanting to meet, let's say, a 5-year plan goal of engaging Jewish values and racial justice in a variety of ways, and the board was feeling like it wasn't doing enough, or that the congregational system, I should say, wasn't doing enough to meet that goal. And so I'm running with a hypothetical based on what you said, that so then maybe the board would have some discussion time for this during a board meeting, and someone would say, what if we were to ask, the appropriate committee to to the community ed committee or whatever it's called to do 5 programs over the course of the year. So you would probably end up having this conversation that would also include people's real and informal knowledge of the personalities in that committee and the personalities on the board. And you'd probably be also factoring in, like, I don't know how Mike is, as the chair of that committee, is going to feel to be asked to do 5 programs. Mike seems like the kind of person who might take offense at being specifically asked to do 5 programs. So what if we looked for a broader goal? First of all, what if we started before we ask for anything? Let's actually invite them to come to the next board meeting. Or if that's too long, let's invite them to talk to you 2 people on the board next week and sort of share their thoughts about how they might help us better achieve this goal. So that's diplomacy, right? Because it could be in a totally different congregation that Mike actually desperately wants the board to tell him things like, we want 5 programs of this sort, and has been asking for that and has explained that that's what helps Mike really like turn the engines on and do very productive work. So this is where it gets down to, like, being thoughtful in how you do the work, but you can still try to steer things towards this model, one moment at a time. Maybe that's the only thing you ask of that committee with this model in mind for a year. But that's still a big step. Hi, Judy. Yes.
Well, I appreciate the description of the different kinds of committees, but I think what is typical here at TBI is that committees are, for the most part, most of the committees or Havaro are self-propelled and actually would appreciate understanding and support from the board, don't actually need direction. In other words, they're really very self-directed for the most part. They have a pretty good idea of the things they want to do, and are really looking for the board to be supportive. I think it would be very beneficial if committees came to the board and talked about some of the things that they do and the way that the board could be helpful. And that would be a good fit for how things actually work at TBI. I don't think, given what our situation really looks like, that the board that it would be a very good idea for the board to say, we want you to do this, this, and this. I, given all our history, I'm hesitant about the feelings that
Yes.
that would be generated. I think that if the board said, we know you're doing X, Y, Z, is there a way we can help, would be very well received. And then, as someone who's involved with a number of committees, um, I think I have somewhat of a sense
Yep.
how it would work.
It was great to see you, Amy. I saw your message. And thank you, Judy. Um, uh, that's really helpful. And so this is really key. Trying to implement change in this direction, it should be done with care and with a strong understanding of the real human relationships and the informal or unstated traditions that are the status quo. Okay. So in the model that I described, there's this moment where the board gives a task to a committee. If a committee has a very strong uh, history as being a very independently operating um, part of the congregation, and that might resist or resent, um, sort of just being out of the blue, tasked by the board, then that's definitely not the way to approach them. Um, oh, hi, Toba. I just saw your hand. I'll call on you in just a moment. Uh, um, right? But it also means that the board shouldn't give up on the idea that there's a limit to that independence. Okay, it is a committee of the board. And, um, if the committee gets to be its own subculture that really sees itself as kind of not clear that the board is the deciding body for the congregation about everything that's important, ultimately. The board doesn't need to step in and make an actual decision about everything because most of the decisions being made by committees are they're fine. They're within bounds of the mission of the congregation, its stated values, its bylaws, and the general direction that the board is staked out, right? I'm not saying boards should micromanage or seek to be controlling. I'm saying that the board is the only group that can be responsible for maintaining this structure. And the structure is really important. Right? So it's like you don't want to end up in a situation where because a committee has gotten so independent, then there have to be showdowns. Um, that usually ends badly. That usually ends in schisms. That ends in people quitting the congregation and joining a different one or forming their own. Um, what you do want to do if things are sort of trending away that direction is quietly and informally find the one or two people on the committee who are the mellowest and aren't invested in the committee being like a fiefdom of its own, and start talking with them about how do we casually change the culture of the committee. Because probably, even if you think they're very far apart, they're not really terribly far apart. Toba, I'm sorry I didn't see you earlier, but hello.
Rabbi, it's nice to see you.
Likewise.
Been a while. Um, so I think that there needs to be more of a different kind of reciprocal, I guess, approach is maybe what I'm thinking. So I work with the Racial Justice Committee, and I could see why the board might say, we're doing a hiring and we want to make sure that we're, doing outreach to people across, to a diverse group. Does the Racial Justice Committee want to look into that to tell us, give us some ideas about how we could do that? Or make a policy even about how we do that in a regular way. And then on the other hand, I think that to me, the Racial Justice Committee are people who, I mean, nobody is an expert in racial justice, but whose focus is to concentrate on those issues. And so I think that the Racial Justice Committee is helping the board in the work they do and also can ask the board to, we want well, I've said this before. So, we want to have a line in the budget so that because if you're committed to racial justice, then we want to be able to do that that isn't dependent on us constantly doing fundraisers or whatever, or that, we would like the board to do this or that. And I think that there should be some autonomy and that some of the committees, depending what they are, can be looked at as the experts. That's what they're doing. Things that the board doesn't have time to, well, I mean, everyone should be focusing on social justice in my world, but it doesn't have time to really focus in the way that the group of people who are doing that. And I don't feel like I feel like the Racial Justice Committee has gotten like a ridiculous amount of support. I like really a lot of support, like individually and as a board, and I appreciate that deeply. And I am working on a report to give to the board because I'm on the board and I know that the board said they wanted reports regularly, but I'm not sure if all the committees who don't have people on the board even necessarily know such a thing, or maybe they've been told it, but it's been let to, it's slid by because of other things going on, whatever. But I feel like I worry a little bit that there is like, I understand you're right and agree that the committees are of the board, but I feel like there needs to be some, and I'm not saying there isn't, but it needs to be a clarity of reciprocity that happens between the committees and the board. And I worry about being a little bit too much one way or the other. In fact, I think both those things happen. So, um, but I think the board doesn't necessarily have time, for instance, to just talk about racial justice. And that's why, to me, there's a racial justice committee, because we're the ones who are able, we're focusing that as volunteers. So I don't know if that makes sense. I'm kind of blabbering around here, but
No, I feel like you were sort of unpacking um, nuanced thoughts about this. And I think I understand that a concern that you're naming is that there are times, I mean, to say it differently than how you said it, um, there are times when the expertise of a committee and that expertise grows through its work, through its active work and focus. There are times when that expertise, it would be a shame, let's say, it would be a shame for the congregation if an uninformed and stubborn board would, sort of acted against the strong advice of a particular committee, um, and that if there were more, and so if I could ask a question about this model, the question in the spirit of what you were talking about would be, does this model assume or include enough back and forth, give and take, reciprocity, and goodwill and trust between whoever would be liaising with the committee from the board, um, whoever's representing the board to the committee and the committee itself? Is there enough trust there and good back and forth going on about whatever action or decision or proposal is being worked on by the committee, for all of them to know that what they're trying to do is arrive at um, a policy suggestion or a proposal um, that is going to be healthy and positive and good for the congregation, and that a lopsided majority of the board can get behind. So I want to say something about attributes of healthy committees in this system. I'm reading off of a slide I didn't get a chance to show you. Right? But so in this model, the committee is responsible um, for not only doing some study and bringing its whatever expertise it may have um, on the matter at hand, but it's also responsible for trying to informally research the congregation's viewpoints and concern.
Uh-oh,
you're
frozen.
frozen.
Am I back?
Yes.
I'm back. Okay, so I was saying the committee is responsible for informally researching the congregation's viewpoints um, and hearing its concerns. And also, the committee is responsible for starting to form an assessment of the real life capacities of the congregation for different kinds of change. And those are things that the board is counting on the committee to provide a better understanding of than the board can arrive at on its own. The next thing that's on this slide about healthy committees is the committee as a united group can totally seek to convince the board that a particular proposal or course of action is a good move or a bad move for the congregation. And I want to say that again and note the careful use of language. The committee as a united group in this system can do that. If the committee is divided amongst itself, it's really not great for lone members of the committee to sort of present themselves as members of the committee and then try to convince the board of some of things that other members on their committee don't agree with. But if the committee is unanimous and maybe understands that there may be a need for some education on the board, not because they look down at the board as ignorant, but because they themselves needed education in order to arrive at a better understanding. And now realize that there was some work and challenge involved in that. If their committee is united around that, they can make it their goal to try to persuade the board, and they should expect that the board is assuming that the committee cares and has an assessment of the congregation's capacities for change, right? So everybody cares about the same things, and they're in a so the board in this system, if a united committee comes forward and says, we feel like there's some things we really want to try to persuade you guys of. And maybe you're already there, but we don't know. So we're opening the conversation, but we want to just be transparent with you that we're hoping we can convince the board of X, Y, and Z. The board is supposed to take that very seriously. The board shouldn't be making decisions that are just, going the opposite direction, the opposite direction of where the committee wants things to go. The final piece of this, and this kind of mitigates the other direction, is if there's been goodwill and trust in this system, then when the board does make a decision, the committee is ethically obligated not to undermine the board's decision. Committee members can say, honestly, if they disagreed with the board's decision. They can say that. They're not gagged from sharing their personal viewpoints. They can say they were disappointed that the board made a particular decision. But if they want to serve on a committee of the board, the ethics that go with this model is that they have to say, but I affirm that the decision was a valid decision, meaning the board acted properly within its rights within our governance system to make this decision. I happen to disagree with it. I hope that a different decision will be made in the future, right? I mean, if it's a decision that's super upsetting to a committee member, then that's the point, that's an inflection point where some committee members decide this isn't the right committee for them, or that maybe this, God forbid, this isn't the right congregation for them. That doesn't happen very often. Usually the differences are not that dramatic, right? They're more likely to be differences about the pace of implementing a particular kind of change, or the degree to which a particular policy takes something in a new direction. I wanted it to go 10 more degrees in that direction, and the board chose 5. That's usually the arena in which these things happen. But this system relies a lot on people understanding how it works and people having a lot of trust and goodwill. And if you can't build the whole system at once, a good place to start is with a committee that you think will be receptive and positive to this framework. Um, or if there's a committee that's non-functional and only has like two people on a piece of paper somewhere that says that they're on the committee and they aren't even meeting, a committee that needs to be built from scratch or rebuilt, um, that's a great opportunity to look for people who like this system of governance and understand why it works well for congregations, um, to commit to those things from the outset. And I want to stress, it's much more common that the initiative for a new policy decision by the board is going to start with a committee itself. It's less common for the board to be originating um, those kind of decisions. If the board thinks it is going to be originating a decision that implicates a committee, the first step is to have informal conversations with members of that committee and the board and figure out where everybody stands and informally get a picture of what a path forward probably looks like. And you're not surprising the committee with tasking it, right? No surprises. That's one of the cardinal rules here. Everybody already knows. The committee's been talking about this with members of the board for 2 months. And they know that what's coming next is this board meeting in which the board is going to task them to do something they already have given a lot of input in about how they want to be asked to do it. That's the ideal of this thing humming well and working well.
Okay. I would like to go ahead and get back to the point, and maybe Tova as well. The situation we have here, I believe, is that there are a couple of committees that don't function in a way that the board believes they should. And the way to address that is actually for the board to speak with the leadership of those committees and actually say, here's the expectations. In other words, it's not okay, for example, to never let anybody else join the committee. Or so, but you don't make policy for committees generally with respect to trying to address a situation that's problematic with one or two committees, which I think in some respects is what we have had a situation here, is that we're making broad policy because we want to kind of get after a problem. To me, that it's like a teacher keeps everybody in after class because Judy was naughty. So don't talk to Judy. So I just like to put that out there and ask the board to kind of step up to what I think is, in fact, a board responsibility when you feel that there is a committee not functioning well, that to speak with the leaders of that committee. That's how you kind of solve problems, not general. In general, we punish everybody, sorry, for what we think is problematic with a couple of committees.
Thank you, Judy. And I saw Phyllis signaling, and I know that we're just a little bit over time, but I put in the chat I can stay on for a bit longer. And I want to say this before Risa has to go. I want to share this slide that I was going to share. Okay, and maybe I should have put this as our first slide now that I'm starting to also gather a little more what may be live for all of you. So, right, there's three, these three things are under
You
the
make it
heading.
bigger. I can't see it.
Yes, I will do that. Let me just move this away on my screen and do this and do this. And hopefully this is a little bit easier to see. Okay. So there's some things that are hallmarks of healthy committees. One is you want to avoid low participation or constant high turnover. That's not the issue you're bringing up right now. You're bringing up the one I just put on the screen. You want to avoid enclickification, which is having the same person chair a committee for more than 6 consecutive years or serve on a committee for more than 10 years at a time. 6 years, someone who chairs a committee for 6 years, that's actually pretty amazing and awesome and a gift most of the time. Somebody who chairs a committee for more than 6 years, they may not intend it at all. But if there's a chair who's been there more than 6 years and there are multiple committee members who've been there more than 10 years, even without the slightest intention, the de facto result is very likely to be that this turns into a clique. That even if the committee doesn't actively try to keep other people or people who think differently from joining it, most congregants won't feel like that's a place where their energy is wanted. And so it is a really good idea to look for ways to try to bring these situations to as painless a conclusion as possible. And that may take some careful work and effort. And one of the ways that you can do that, do some of that work, is to make the Department for Thriving Communities the bad guy. You are at liberty to say that it's our presentation, our best practices teaching, that we strongly recommend that committees that have had the same chair for 6 years or longer enter into discussion to have this the next year be their off ramp. They can serve again in a few years, but they should step off the committee for a few years. And that people who've been on the same committee for more than 10 years, they don't need to all step off all at once. You don't want the committee to disappear. But they should talk amongst themselves and see if one of them is willing to step off this year and one the next year. And the committee should be intentionally seeking members who come from a very diverse set of subgroups within the congregation. And by diverse subgroups, I don't just mean the way we talk about demographics in American society. I mean looking at many different axes of diversity within the congregation. And that would include life experience or professional skill sets. Intentionally having a couple people on the ritual committee, one of whom, is a mathematician and one of whom has the life experience of being a cancer survivor. And not because of what they're bringing to the table vis-a-vis direct experience with traditional Jewish ritual, but because you're intentionally trying to create a constantly shifting set of axes of diversity to populate committees with, even at the very least around the periphery. It's okay if there's kind of an interested core group that loves to geek out on this particular aspect of synagogue life. But it's not okay if it's a closed circle. And it's not okay if it is detached from the mission and values and vision of the congregation. So that's why I pop up this last thing, to bring someone new onto the committee each year if possible, and to try to have someone step off. If you have a situation where you've got committees where the same person's been chair for longer than this duration, or that there's too many people who've served for too long, you need to allow that it's going to take time, and that there may be some uncomfortable conversations, but it's not a good idea to go in like a raging bull and just tell folks this is how it's got to be. It's a much better idea to put out feelers and try to figure out, how can we do this in the most painless way? And if people do step, it doesn't mean don't ruffle any feathers. It just means don't do maximal feather ruffling when minimal might have done the job. And if someone has served on a committee for more than 10 years or chaired for more than 6, and they do step off, they need to be celebrated and acknowledged. It doesn't need to be a gigantic gala event. It can be something as simple as a newsletter article about them and a lunch that people who are interested in this committee or who have served on it in the past are invited to. But you definitely want to honor and acknowledge anybody who's given that kind of time, even if they created a clique, even if they created headaches. So happy to, be in one-on-one conversation if that is helpful. But you guys you can get there. You can incrementally get to where you're not stuck because of this phenomenon. This happens all the time. Nobody's done anything wrong. This happens all the time, and it's challenging, but it's easier to deal with before the fact than after the fact. Like you can do a whole lot to prevent it from happening in the first place. Hi, Phyllis and Toba.
Hello. It just occurred to me, one of the areas, and this has been a wonderful presentation. I really thank you for it.
Thanks.
One part I think we glossed over or didn't attend to that I think is significant in our congregation is that liaison position. We don't have that. I don't think a lot of our board members really know what the committees are doing. And so how can they make good recommendations? If they haven't come to a committee meeting or even some of the committee's events. And I think that's an area we can pay some attention to that will preempt problems coming up. If you know what's going on in that committee, you can make more appropriate recommendations, and there'll be more of an ear for them in the committee if it feels like there's a teammate involved, and
It's
not just someone saying, here's what you need to do and what you did wrong.
I appreciate that. And you can start to improve that. And as you might guess, it's also something that needs to be handled with diplomatic tact, right? So, like, there's this thin line between it's so awesome that Jenny now from the board comes to our meetings because the board's really interested. And Jenny's trying to be helpful, right? The thin line between that and did you notice that the board now has a spy at our meetings and is monitoring what we're talking about and is trying to control what we're doing? So I tend to think that it's better if the board sort of chooses who will liaise with a committee when a committee is working on something that's going to result in a proposal or something that's going to lead potentially to an important change that will impact a large part of the congregation. So that it's good for that person to whoever it is to be assigned to liaise with them and not to sit in on all their deliberations, but maybe to come the third time that they're meeting to talk about stuff and kind of hear how things are going and to talk informally outside of committee meetings with the committee chair. Informal conversations can do a lot of work in this system. They help figure out how to avoid surprising people and how to figure out who on each committee is a holistic systems thinker by nature and who might have more tunnel vision around their identity being sort of fused with this particular committee and wanting things to be done a certain way in this domain. There's usually people with both orientations on any committee, even one that seems like it's become very clickified. There's going to be people still probably on that committee who have it in their nature to be more oriented towards holistic systems thinking and or who seek harmony, right? So this is I wish I had said this when Tova was on. It's really about the committee and the board kind of working to this place where they meet each other, figuring out what that place is. It's not the board trying to impose its rule over the committee, and it's not the board letting go and letting the committee have more authority than it should have. And that's not fair to the congregation, right? Like one of the slides I didn't show you was that every committee should be required twice a year to actually have a printed out mission, the mission and vision statement of the congregation. And they should read it aloud and ask themselves the question, are we making sure that we're serving the mission and the vision, or whatever you call it? Some congregations have like mission and core principles. Whatever that is, whatever your most up-to-date version of that is, if there's a committee that's kind of going a little rogue, they're going to find themselves feeling discomfort as they read this statement, and that's good. That means that it will serve as a small. They may self-correct. They may self-correct. Yeah, Caitlin.
I have a little bit of a question. Just to come back to Rabbi Ruhi's question that she left in the chat.
What was it, Caitlin?
Sorry, I got a tickle. Her question was, what does the board do to move things forward when, and then this is just from the text, a committee is very pleased with the work they are doing, but isn't meeting board identified needs that should be within that committee's purview? And so obviously that's a really specific question that she came up with. I think that we have a lot of conversation still to talk about how the board and the committees work together and kind of rebuild some of that trust, because I don't find the conversations we're to be specifically for the punishing of one or two committees. And I was a little like, that was a little jarring for me to hear that characterization. And so I guess with Rabbi's question and with how do we kind of develop those relationships in a way that is uh, helpful and moving forward, and when our self-reflections are not necessarily aligned with the what other people are seeing.
Right, right. Okay. No, I just scrolled up and I see Rabbi Ruchi's questions. They're such good questions.
We're pretty lucky to have her as a thinking partner.
Yeah,
I'm so glad
so
she's
no.
my rabbi.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Rabbi Maurice, before you jump in, I'm going to make you full host because I've got to jump off and take care of some
You
kids.
should. You should. You've been
I will do
heroic.
that, but thank you so much. And obviously, people can stay for as long as they want to continue the conversation.
Thanks, Ron. And this is being recorded, so I will have the recording actually on this end, but I will share it back with Ron so he can share it with you all. Look, both questions Rabbi Ruchi posted in the chat are ultimately going to involve a decision by there is going to be a painful conversation, at least one painful conversation. There's no avoiding at least one painful conversation. If you're serious about addressing the two problems, right? So the first one, a committee chair has been in place forever and is not encouraging new leadership. The good news about that one is that is as old as the history of organizations. Right? And so, this is really kind of a judgment call that is so specific to the personalities involved and to the dynamics within the congregation. If the board seems pretty unanimous that a particular committee chair has served for too long, and the rabbi agrees, and the key staff that work with that committee agree, then it means that there has to be a conversation that involves most likely the president of the board and or the rabbi, possibly the both of them together, but they got to weigh, is that likely to make this particular person feel ganged up on? They got to weigh a lot of stuff, right? I mean, if the rabbi and the and the president of the board um, are both men, and the committee chair is a woman, they're probably not going to both meet with that person at once unless the specific personalities make it absolutely obvious why they should meet at once, because this demographic thing is not actually the main issue that's going to characterize the conversation, because these three people are different. Right? But you can slice and dice that lots of different ways. But it means that somebody needs to tell this person that it's a concern, that they don't like having this conversation because they feel enormously grateful to the person's dedication and sacrifice and leadership. And that in many ways, this domain is a domain that the board needs there to be the board needs for there to be opportunities for members to play a part of this, because it functions at a certain level of success, and it's needed to be able to be flexible and do some various kinds of things, including things people will not be able to predict in the near future. In other words, if you hadn't too long-standing chair done all of the hard work that you did and others on the committee did, then what we might have instead is a non-functioning committee, or a very poorly functioning committee. And not only would we not have a bunch of our ritual traditions or our core curriculum, but we also wouldn't be at this juncture where, a little ironically, now somebody needs to tell you that it's time for you to step back and let someone else have a turn. And I'm the person who has to be the one to tell you this. And I want, and the first thing that's going to have to happen, and by the way, it's probably, if it's one person, it's better that it's the president than the rabbi. It's a lot better than the rabbi can be there if it's a two-person thing. But the rabbi needs to hold a role in reserve for, I can be the person you come to cry on their shoulder. Mm-hmm. So, and it's to say, how do you feel about this? Could we come up with a plan together in which you identify a time span for you to, wind down? And I will tell you, if that person says 3 years and you're like, oh no, why didn't I tell them 1 year? Don't think that. Be like, okay, that's a long time, but if they commit to it, that's better than this is going on indefinitely. And frankly, if your response is to whatever time they set is great, let's work with that. My ask is that you allow the board to float suggestions for new committee chairs while you also think about who might be a good new committee chair and suggest it. That we're both involved in thinking about that. And there's a decent chance that somebody who picks more than a year as an off-ramp will, once like there's a decision about who's going to be next, that they'll probably decide to make it a shorter off-ramp. And then it's so important, even if the person seems alienated or upset or hurt, it's important to honor them. And if there's a power struggle, like over, like let's say it's not written anywhere in the bylaws who decides who will be the next chair, the board should assume that power. And that, and then the other thing is, like, the president only does this if the president should ask the whole board, do you have my back? And every single person on the board needs to say, I've got your back. No one on the board can undermine this particular decision. For the president to ask a chair who's been on too long to help craft an off-ramp. So, I would say the second question about the committee is pleased with the work it's doing, but isn't meeting board identified needs. I think that should be, it's the same kind of conversation, right? I mean, it's not a good idea to communicate this to the whole committee at once. It's something that the chair or co-chairs of the committee need to be able to hear and then need to be able to tell the others on their committee about. And, this is why it's a good idea to involve committee members in some kind of training. Let them hear from the presenters from our department that this is how we recommend that governance work and how it's actually problematic. And I wouldn't use these words to be in someone's face, but it's actually undemocratic for a committee to give itself more authority than it should have within this kind of system. The board's the group that's been voted on to make decisions that really impact the experience of being a member of this congregation. Most people serving on a committee were not voted by the whole congregation.
Right.
Right. So they're accountable to the board. And the board not only has the right to remind a committee that there are certain needs that are in the bylaws. Side note, if you need to update your bylaws, that's an opportunity, right? We're updating our bylaws. We want to update and make sure our stuff describing the committees is up to date, and we're inviting input from the committee members, but we've also got input ourselves. And that can be the reason for these unpleasant conversations, right? Have an argument between the president and the committee chair about the fact that the board does have the right to expect the committee to remind the committee to work on areas that are specified in the bylaws, right? And that the board feels really strongly that these two areas are going to go into the revised bylaws. Like at a certain point, there is like a possibility of direct head-to-head conflict. Hopefully it can be made as minimal as possible. And hopefully people can be grown-ups and, not cause a lot of destructive fallout. And again, I don't advise like, the overnight, like try to avoid making a step that you could predict was going to make everyone on the committee resign in protest,
Totally.
right?
Mhm.
Like if that happens, it should only have happened because you tried really hard for that not to happen. And the problem got so bad that seriously, like no one on the committee could see reason. And then in that case, you just have to take your lumps and have this disruptive thing happen and then get to the other side of it. Um, but usually it's not that bad. Usually it won't be that bad.
Well, again, back to that liaison position, it wouldn't get to that place. If the committee doesn't know the expectations, how can we expect them to
That's right.
achieve them? And so then to come on and say you're not meeting expectations I never told you I had about you
That's right.
is a little unfair.
It's not fair. I totally agree. I mean, a really good place to start is by uh, to a place to start about the committees not doing the work they need to be doing is, just to specifically ask them to do something very specific and to ask with a lot of kavod, to ask with a lot of respect. And if there's pushback, then to say, can we talk about this over coffee? Um, because I want to share with you that there's some board discussion, and concern. And can we sort of put our cards on the table about what we think, you know, like is the relationship between the committee and the board? And I would really like it if it didn't seem to the committee like the board was out of bounds. Um, you know, like having a matter it's been discussing as a board, and seeking the committee's work on it. And part of that is a sign of respect for your experience and expertise in this matter. We really need you. Can you work on this? Right. And if you can start to move things by like the first time you do that, they say yes, and then they do it, is going to matter a lot, right? Like hopefully that goes well. Maybe you could pick something that isn't such a very high stakes thing, and try to have a success, right? This is different. This is about seeing if you can nudge a committee to be willing to do work that you're asking of it. This is different than the whole committee has become a countercultural subculture, or the committee has a chair who's been in too long and is not making room for new people to move into leadership. Um, and
It's
it's
so, oh,
totally
sorry.
normal. Sorry to oversay this. It's totally normal. Like if there's a couple of people who have come to the rabbi and have come to the president and have said, I would be serving on the ritual committee, but I feel like there's no path towards having a real say. And I don't mean I'd start out humble in my first year, but I would hope I would have an equal say before long. And like it's totally okay for the rabbi and or president to say, we know, and we've opened a conversation with the chair about transitioning off. And I suspect it may be another couple of years before that happens. So I really hope you won't give up on your interest. That is a perfectly acceptable message, and one that most congregants would understand. They don't want to be in a congregation where, you know, even if they are annoyed by the chair, they don't want to be in a congregation where chairs just get told to buzz off unceremoniously after they've
Yeah,
volunteered for
rowdy.
years, right? They don't want that either. So should we should we call it a day?
So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. It
Really
definitely has
helpful.
given me a lot to think about.
Thank you. I hope that I hope we didn't cover everything that everybody wanted to talk about in these last 20 minutes, but here
I
we
do
are.
wish there would all been together a little longer.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we're so blessed in that we have so many committees that work so differently and so well, and so many committees that work so differently and don't work so well.
Yeah.
So, and same with the board. We have so much board that works so differently and so well, and so much of our board that has space for growth. And so hopefully this can at least be um, a good shared language for us as we move forward and trying to build the most successful systems and supports and community that we can. I'm really grateful.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your help with that.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye,
All
everyone.
right. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Marka Timatova. See you
Mara
later.
Fatima Right back at you. Thank you, Caitlin.